It's time for the show where we discuss things. Some of those things might even be scientific. Or not, who's to say? Welcome to Vaguely Scientific. I demand that I may or may not be Derek. It is possible, though unlikely, that Jim is not absent, as is seldom the case. Hi, Jim.
Greetings. I'm not absent, as is the case.
Seldom. And is our guest alive or dead, or perhaps both at the same time? I don't know. Quantum mechanics is way over my head. Please welcome Anne.
I think we're all in that state of uncertainty in 2025.
Yeah. In the quantum realm.
Yeah.
Like Ant-Man. There's a Marvel tie-in. Yeah.
I read on the internet that it was recently postulated that the universe is not actually real in local space, which is fine. I'm okay with that.
I don't believe that that's really the scientific method at play, and I think that it's a farce that we're just laughing in the face of
in the face of the
and scientists alike.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, it's possible that it's like one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, it's true on paper, but like, who cares? Because we're living a reality, so it has no bearing on our life.
It's not real if you define real as fake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
All right. Well, anyway, this auditory program serves as a platform wherein inquisitive participants submit queries to which we endeavor to provide responses grounded in an approximate application of scientific principles. The accuracy of these responses remains a variable factor. However, prior to engaging in this analytic discourse, we shall commence with the dissemination of a scientifically intriguing datum designated as the fun science fact of the day. Jim?
Wow. That's amazing. I was reading along with you and I was still like confused. Not confused, but I was like, wow, you're doing a great job. Anyway.
I panicked halfway through it, but I made it.
Well, here's our fun science fact of the day. It's about the Canadian Shield, which is an expansive ancient rock that's been exposed to the surface. The rocks that make up this shield are all over 2.5 billion years old, and some have been dated as early as 4.2 billion years old. And the entire area is really a very important window into the geological history of Earth. It's really quite a fantastic place to go and study, but also it's just beautiful.
Canadian Shield. Where approximately is this?
It's sort of like in the area around Hudson Bay, I believe. And I'll put a link in the show notes to sort of like a map of it. But it's, as I recall, it sort of rings Hudson Bay, basically.
Okay. Well, that's fun.
Yeah.
We should all go.
I mean, I'd go to Northern Canada. It's really pretty.
Well, while we're all planning our vacations to Northern Canada...
Oh, maybe not this time of year, though. Let's wait until, like, July.
I said planning. I didn't say we're going now.
We're leaving. Goodbye, audience. We're on our way. You can join us if you want.
I disagree. Winter's the best time to go.
Hey, you know what? That's fair. It looks like a Bob Ross painting.
I'm biased because I just think winter is the best time for most things.
I just don't like when the air hurts my face.
Yeah, but it hurts your face in the desert, too.
Especially if you have a horse with no name.
Yeah, why didn't they just give that name a horse? I mean, they've been riding for days, right?
Yeah,
like,
why didn't they give that name a horse?
That horse, what, did I say name a horse?
Yeah.
You did.
Oh, well, you know what I meant.
Oh, man. This is a real good one, everyone.
What do you call a moose that doesn't have a name?
A moose.
Anonymous. Anonymous. It's a dad joke.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Speaking of dad jokes, it's time for stuff we got wrong and actually bothered to look up later. In episode 167, we were talking about how the moon is moving away from Earth, and Jim said that he thought the moon probably wasn't speeding up. Turns out that the moon is speeding up, and as the moon orbits Earth, the tidal bulge of the ocean causes drag on the Earth. Because of physics, the angular momentum of the Earth-Moon system has to stay constant. So as Earth slows, that energy is transferred to the moon and causes it to orbit a wee bit faster. Also, we looked up if the Earth was moving away from the sun, and apparently it is. The sun loses mass all the time, and so its gravitational pull weakens very slowly.
Yeah, I thought all that was really interesting, and it's worth mentioning that these are all very, very subtle changes. So these are not things that we're ever really going to notice, and it's not going to affect us really throughout most of the history of Earth, I would say. But it's still kind of cool.
Oh, through the history of Earth? I thought you were going to say the history of like humanity, but like the history of Earth?
Yeah, I mean the only really noticeable thing is that eventually I believe that the moon will move far enough away that we won't have total eclipses anymore. But that's quite some ways away, so.
Total eclipse anymore? I don't know.
I'm going to ask this question, and the answer will mean nothing to me, but how far away does it have to... How far away does it have to get for that to happen?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I'm not sure. It can't be all that much further than it is now, because there are certain eclipses that we have that are called annular eclipses, where because the moon is further away in its orbit than it would be otherwise, it actually doesn't cover up the entire sun. So it creates what's called the ring of fire effect.
Okay.
So
there's another song I want to immediately
sing. Right? So that already happens now. So it can't be that much further before we actually lose that altogether.
Well, in the meantime, I think we should probably talk about our first question. Could Captain America happen?
I mean, technically it has, because I've seen comics of Captain America. Yeah. So like somebody's making it right now. Like it exists.
Yeah, the story exists. So the idea of Captain America happened. Well, there you go, all my notes.
I think one of the things that I found most interesting about my research is that and I don't think this will come to anyone's surprise, but there are upper limits on how much stress a human body can take. And while it is a lot higher than mine, for instance, it is a lot less than Captain America, at least as I understand him from, you know, my limited exposure from like MCU and then like a scattering of little comics.
Sure. I mean, it's in theory or in principle, it's actually very simple. It's just like super soldier, right?
Yeah.
I do actually, I give it a little bit of thought here. I wanted to make sure that all the research we may have done is valid. And I just kind of thought the difference between whether or not could Captain America happen or could Captain America happen today is almost negligible, because I mean, we know for a fact that Captain America didn't happen. Like in real life, there was no Captain America, and they did not have the technology at the time. But the question kind of in essence is, would that be possible? Like assuming we were technologically there.
Yeah.
Because spoiler, will say, while I don't think we had the technology during World War II, I also think we don't have the technology today.
The one thing that I found most interesting that I didn't actually know, because one of the things I looked into was steroid use. And that'll really bulk up your muscles, and you can get quite strong abusing steroids, basically. But one thing I did find out about this that I didn't really actually know is that long-term steroid use actually weakens your bones quite a bit and can lead to osteoporosis.
I think I've heard that.
Yeah, and so you can have as much muscle as you want, but if the bones can't support any additional weight, you can't. You might have enough muscle to lift a car, for instance. I don't know if a steroid user can get that strong, but if your bones can't support the car, can't support the weight, then it's kind of irrelevant anyway.
I was reading about a kind of drug called a myostatin inhibitor. And it apparently is not a steroid. But I was also trying to read like specifically what steroids are, and I am, as I say all the time, I am not a microbiologist. I don't understand this stuff. But apparently myostatin is the protein that puts a limit on muscle growth.
Oh, okay.
So if you inhibit that, it stops, the sort of natural barrier you have. And I learned that a lot of like bodybuilders use this, and they are currently, this might be an outdated source, but they are currently testing to see what detriments this has to health, because a lot of bodybuilders started using it instead of steroids because obviously they can't use steroids.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of interesting.
So are they not illegal then, or?
I do not have a definite answer on that.
Okay. Weird.
So I looked at this question mostly because I trusted you guys to have the steroids and limits of human body covered.
What are you trying to say?
There was science there that I knew I wasn't going to understand, and I thought somebody else would.
Oh, okay.
However,
nice recovery there.
The way I wanted to approach this question was a socio-political aspect of it.
Okay.
Because Captain America, the question is specifically Captain America and not could super soldiers happen.
Sure.
But Captain America exists in a world where they absolutely think, one, this is a military endeavor. You have Howard Stark present as like the civilian contractor doing the science, but this is a military program using a German scientist they have like plucked. But I would argue specifically one issue with that, both today and even back then, is I think if you were going to have that done, it would not be through the military directly. It would have been a private arms contractor developing this separately and then selling it to the military, either the soldiers or the serum. And you get that a little bit like later in the canon with like the Winter Soldier and everything like that. But
sure.
I find it hard to believe that the military would put all their funding into like one singular dude.
Yeah.
Well, that has been a common criticism of the like meta critics of the franchise. Yeah.
I mean, it's not so much a critic of like the franchise, but in the way we know, particularly the U.S. military industry works, I think it would be a private arms company.
Oh yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense.
But also, we've seen throughout history, and this has only gotten more true since World War II, that human beings are not the most effective weapon.
Oh, yeah.
For certain things. And Captain America is very much, he's built for speed, he's built for strength. He is meant to go into a battlefield and just like wreck stuff.
Yeah.
But generally, we've always been moving towards weapons that take the human element out of it. Like the better bombs, we want longer range missiles. We want machines that can do that work. And I think the one field in which human beings do excel at are things like espionage.
Oh, yeah.
So if you wanted a super soldier, quote unquote, made for the task, I think you would be more likely to find it in intelligence work, in which case post-serum Steve Rogers is like the worst guy for that because he's so noticeable.
He's so noticeable.
Yeah. Yeah, I always hear things about spies needing to be as innocuous as possible. And so, like, especially with reference to James Bond, it's like, that's a very normal name, and he's like a pretty normal dude, but apparently it's even like he might be a little too handsome to be a spy, because being handsome means that you're more noticeable. So you really want just sort of like a plain, mundane person.
Exactly.
And a totally jacked man.
Well, yeah, one of the... I don't know if this is still true. I'm citing sources from like the 70s, but like one of the ways that they used to interview for like Secret Service and stuff was like they'd put you in like a lineup and they would ask people who were looking at you for like 10 minutes or something, like describe this person. And the more adjectives that people could think of, the less qualified they considered that person.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it was tall. Okay, well, that's going to stand out. They had curly hair. Oh, that's going to stand out,
Well, and that's my thing is he is not the most ideal human for, I think, the task.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I do know that there is like the plot in the story where it's, we wanted to have more of these guys, but because of reasons, we only have this one.
Yeah, but you brought up we're developing weapons such as guns and missiles and stuff. And I look at, if you're going to genetically modify soldiers, like human beings, like you give somebody a gun, the gun is the great equalizer in the world. You no longer have to be super physically fit when anyone can be taken down by a bullet. So that's why they're looking at drones and taking humans out of the battlefield.
Yeah.
So yeah, Captain America is such an unlikely idea. And I mean, it works in a world of superheroes, but
And one of the other things about that is that, I was thinking, what are some of the ways that Captain America could deal with a drone, for instance? And the answer to that is that he'd chuck his shield at it. But for some reason, and I don't know what the reason is, but I know there's probably a canon reason to this, but like he throws his shield and it comes back to him. Like in the real world, someone would throw their shield and it would just be gone. Like they'd have to go get it.
There's not really a canon reason for that. The movies tried to say that it had like a magnet homing device, but in the comics, it has been explored that he's just real good at it.
I just assumed it was sort of some kind of, like the shield itself was like a semi-autonomous drone that would then home back in on Cap, but...
Sure.
I mean, maybe in a more modern sense, they have added that tech to him,
Yeah. But yeah, I mean... we're moving away from things like ground combat, like that sort of thing, even to the extent that, like, we have mechanized infantry and tanks and vehicles and these sorts of things. And while Cap might be able to deal with that in the comic book world, again, a human body is not going to be able to deal with the kinds of stresses that they will be under for this kind of an activity, just like taking on a tank or something like that.
Sure.
In this instance, the creation of a super soldier, in the canon, he's not the first attempt, right? Like they had been trying it in Germany, they had gotten Red Skull, human experiments had gone horribly wrong. But it also suggests that this is not something that you can get to achieve without having a lot of experiments beforehand.
Yeah.
Which would require... a lot of secrecy, theoretically, in the context of what they wanted him to be. And also, it's the risk. How many people died before Steve Rogers? We don't know. We're not shown that.
Yeah.
But that's true.
If you're struggling with manpower, as you are in like the later stages of World War II, even America, which, we had a surplus supply, met only by the Soviets. Like, you're not going to risk the testing it's going to need because you don't know what the concept. I don't know. The payoff probably isn't going to be worth it.
Yeah.
And that's why it is somewhat important to the story that it does take place during World War II, because it was a German scientist who was forced by the Nazis to work on this. So you said we're not shown how many people were failed subjects and were casualties to it. And I believe that's not really mentioned in the Captain America movie of the MCU, but in the comics, it's definitely not zero.
Well, it also suggests, because I misread this question and I, for some reason, added now to the end of it. I do think it's worth pointing out that a lot of the ethical standards we have for human testing came after World War II.
Yeah.
So they are operating under a different environment. Like the Nuremberg Code deals with human testing subjects, and that's an immediate result of what was going on in World War II. One of the requirements is that you do have to prove you've done animal testing, which leads to a fun little side thought of, wow, we're going to have an awful lot of jacked animals running around before we can ever get to a Steve Rogers.
Like a jack-rabbit.
Oh no, the Hulk dogs. Yeah,
that's what that's gonna be, apparently. Just some gerbils that are just ripped. I also think that taking this question in a different direction, we've looked at it from like, would Captain America be useful in a military standpoint? No. However, I do think that if we had the technology to make that happen, I think we would not see him as Captain America. I think we would see him as an influencer celebrity that is marketing something like Ozempic.
No. Yeah. Probably.
If we saw that serum anywhere, I think it would be marketed as an aesthetic beauty treatment. Because even if you could get a human body to do that, like they would want to look like post-serum Steve Rogers, and I think you would see it more selling to the common consumer in the same way that like Botox is or something. And
right.
I think the military would be like, what are we supposed to do with this?
Now, we don't have to stay on this too long, but that point is, I want to call attention to the Captain America: The First Avenger film, because I remember having that thought, and I believe that it's actually addressed in that movie in a fairly interesting way. And I remember arguing with a friend of mine from high school who didn't like that they deviated from the source material, and I was like, nobody cares. But anyway, the idea that like it is addressed that because the scientist who knew the formula was assassinated after Steve Rogers becomes Captain America, they're like, oh, well, we can't make more. We can't perfect the formula. This is not a viable thing. I mean, you are correct that it wouldn't really be viable even if they did mass produce super soldiers. But even the film was like, there's only one guy. That's not really going to make a significant difference. So they do make him a PR thing. Like a marketing thing for support our troops. Here's Captain America, the hero of, the allies, right? And so they kind of did do that.
I mean, he becomes a war bond influencer, but I guess my point is more that because this serum, theoretically, I don't think would ever be actually developed in a military sense.
Oh, I agree with that.
Like, from the origin, I just don't think there would be a reason for a spy to be like, hee, give me all your vials.
I don't know why, but for some reason, hee, give me all your vials is just so funny to me. I can imagine like a Rumpelstiltskin, like fairy tale like creature being like, give me all your vials, and then like, I don't know, making a princess fall asleep or something. I don't know.
Now, I want to say something because we touched on the steroids, which I'm sure there's more to say about, but another thing that I took from the canon of Captain America was the man out of time angle that was added to it. And as we all know, Captain America is frozen in an iceberg, and then he becomes an Avenger in modern day, right? And being cryogenically frozen, we have discussed at length, likely not possible, especially not in World War II. But as much as I personally really like Captain America in the Avengers context, he is one of my favorite of the Avengers, I still kind of found it a little hard to swallow that this guy from World War II, this one super soldier guy who already, his superpowers weren't that significant even back then, is revived and is like, I believe that he would still be a heroic member of the Avengers, but the fact that he becomes such a significant one is always, I want it to be true as a fan of the character, but I'm still like, that's a little far-fetched.
In terms of like the fact that all the actual magic people are like you and are also important. Is that what you mean?
Right. Like how effective he would be. And he's mostly effective in a leadership role and like morale and stuff. And he demonstrates that he's a good tactician and stuff. And those are all admirable qualities, but there are other leaders even in the Avengers. So like,
that brings up a thing I hadn't thought about before, though, is that it is addressed in the first Avenger that, the reason he picks Rogers is that, like, whatever is inside will be amplified.
Yeah.
So it does kind of beg the question is, does the serum, they talk about it from a morality standpoint. If you're evil, you are more evil. If you're good, you're just going to be like the best. But I wonder, when you say he's a good tactician, like, did the serum also make him good at tactics? Like, is he smarter because of it?
In the comics, he is, because it has strength and muscle enhancement, but also cerebral enhancement. So he is supposed to be able to think faster than the average person. He's supposed to be able to, he can process information so that like where we would be overwhelmed hearing so many conversations going on at a time, he has the mental processing power that he can like be a spy as well as a grunt soldier.
Oh, my bad. I guess I ruled him out for espionage and didn't think about his thinking.
Well, I mean, but that's fair point because that's not really used in the comics very often. It is, and even in the movie, which I know the comics, but I know probably most of our listeners have more of a background just watching the movies. They don't really address what it did to him other than physically, because Steve Rogers is chosen because he demonstrates that he's the selfless, quick thinking, morally good guy, and they don't really address that it does anything beyond that. And that kind of leads to like, why would they choose Steve Rogers if he wasn't already that tactically intelligent? I don't know.
I see. Yeah.
I guess it does bring up the question of just like, if a program valued somebody who was quick thinking and good at tactics, it's like, why does he also need washboard abs? Like, why couldn't you just give him a strategic role?
Because he's a superhero.
Because they wanted something gorgeous to look at while they were being fed tactics.
Yeah, all the scientists were like, "Oh, you're so smart, but like we hate looking at you. Can we fix that?"
Oh,
if only this guy was jacked, then we could listen to him more effectively.
I just want to be clear that the scientists in the 40s had sexism for that.
Yeah.
Oh man. I was trying to think of different ways where we could actually make a Captain America or like a super soldier of some sort.
Sure.
And I feel like it's a cop out, and I feel like I'm gonna get, a little bit of flack from maybe both of you for this, but I think the best way to do it is to give them power armor instead of enhancing them genetically.
I don't think you're gonna get flack from me. I am gonna say that
it's not Captain America.
Suggesting, yeah, you're suggesting making Iron Man.
Yeah, I was thinking that the whole time. But it's one of those things where it's like, not only is it going to give you probably more strength than you would have if you enhanced your muscles, maybe even at the expense of your bones, depending on what you're doing. But it would also probably give you the ability, some abilities that you wouldn't normally have. Like you would have some kind of HUD that has maybe radar or something in it, heat vision. You would have armor. So if you did get shot, then the armor would stop some of that. And not only that, but also, if you have people that are roughly the same size, these things could be interchangeable. So, if somebody gets injured or killed, then you could send that armor off to somebody else. And it's not that you've wasted that asset, because I would assume that, it takes some amount of time and effort to get this super soldier up to snuff. Whereas an armor suit, you can just pass on between people.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I absolutely agree that Iron Man feels like a more likely thing that anybody would want to make.
Yeah, and that goes back to, weapons developers and a third party selling to a military and stuff. They're going to make drones. They're going to make, even Iron Man turned his suits into remote control suits. So at that point, why are they humanoid? Cause comics.
Well, because he already had all the humanoid shaped pieces and he was not going to waste them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Recycling. But there's another sort of element to like how far could we go, like how much could we do, and in terms of like CRISPR stuff and like mRNA stuff, I'm throwing out terms as if I know what I'm talking about, but we could help with the like immune system. We could help healing of a human being. So maybe we don't need somebody who can like outrun a car, but we could like help longevity of human beings in that way. And it would be minor, and mostly it wouldn't be like a one-time injection of a drug. It would be like a recurring thing. Yeah. So there's something to a super soldier where it's not I would say it's not really as valuable as a soldier, but as like medical enhancements to like humans' bodies, maybe there's value there.
Well, one of the things that's also worth mentioning is that with the way that we can, at least with current technology, genetic enhancements are kind of tricky on an adult because you would have to hit every single cell in their body. Okay. Theoretically, you could do this to like an embryo or something where they have far fewer cells, but then that raises a whole other host of ethical concerns, not the least of which is still, again, experimenting on humans and things like that. So
yeah.
One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was just like I don't even want to say like the ethical concerns of it, but it's just like the practicality of taking certain people and turning them into super soldiers, but then at the end of whatever you're doing with them, what then becomes of the super soldier? You just send them home and they're normal, except they're super beefy. Like, what happens after that?
You're writing an Alan Moore comic now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, this has got to have been I guess they become an Avenger is what happens.
Yeah. Or they're just forgotten by the government.
Yeah,
and I did
that's true.
Want to touch on Captain America happening. We're looking at like the practicality of a super soldier, and we've covered all those. But like Captain America as a propaganda piece, I absolutely think could happen, and I think we are even more primed in post-World War II eras when we have the culture of a viral celebrity.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so what I want to say is, so Captain America becomes, he does his little war bond tour, and like people who see him there like him, but for the most part, he's not like really well known until he starts doing, he does his big rescue, and then he's in all the newspapers, and everyone's like, ooh, the iconic shield, the iconic dude. And I think that we as people, as human beings, always want to do this, where we do attach ourselves to both like feel-good stories and the people in them. And I think that we could very easily make a Captain America in the sense that they are a manufactured viral celebrity for propaganda purposes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there is like a history, like I think back to when I was learning like American history in school, like, and you learn the names, like you have to memorize the names of the founding fathers and the important players and stuff. And it's like easier to teach people that way than it is to think in terms of like the entire population of a country. Because we need someone to relate to. That's like the way storytelling works for humanity. So like we need to know George Washington, but like George Washington was accompanied by tons of people.
Yeah.
That's a very reductive example because I know we know a bunch of other people in George Washington's time, but that's my point.
Right. Yeah, it's not the person at the top of the pyramid that's the end all be all. There's a whole host of people behind them making sure that they can do the thing they need to do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and we actually see that happen on a small scale in World War II with real people. An example comes to mind. This was multiple people, but the Sullivan brothers. The Sullivan brothers were 5 brothers, all enlisted at the same time, and they were in the Navy, the U.S. Navy. And they became like this face of, American boys doing their part. Like people loved them. Unfortunately, they were not like actual super soldiers. So unfortunately, they served all on the same ship. It was the USS Juno. And Juno was hit, it exploded, and they all died. And the country was like, the country was devastated. Also, they led to a law in the Navy that if a family had multiple sons serving, they couldn't serve on the same ship.
I've heard of that because my grandfather and his 3 brothers all went out, and they were not like even close to each other where they were at. So,
yeah, that's directly because of the Sullivan brothers.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Of, like, we shouldn't have your line wiped out in one lucky hit.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about that.
All that to say, like, they absolutely were these celebrity people in the newspapers, and specifically in the U.S. newspapers, that the general public got very attached to, even though they didn't know them, and that the US press absolutely did use as propaganda.
Mm.
And I think that, so Captain America, like taking a soldier who maybe does something or is notable for some reason, taking him on tour and then constantly churning out these like news stories of like, your favorite soldier has done it again and blah, blah, blah. Even if they're not like hyping up things, I think that is the most likely, and we have seen it. We have seen Captain America in that vein happen. And I think if you're going to have Captain America happen, it's going to be the celebrity.
Yeah. And what makes Captain America then the fictional, the superhero is that this fantastic individual soldier like actually is a single individual person doing all this stuff, and that's where the comic book element comes.
But I do want to point out, though, even within the comic book thing, it's not just him. He has the Howling Commandos.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, you could send out somebody who is a capable soldier and just kind of give people updates, but you also have a team with him to make sure, like, he's doing, like, the heroic stuff gets done.
Yeah, and I mean, this is not really related to what you're saying, but it is, I guess, worth mentioning that when Captain America originally came out, before the Man Out of Time story arc was invented, like Captain America was invented during World War II, and he was a propaganda superhero. This was at a time when there were comic books that featured just soldiers. Like, they didn't have superhero names. They were just, these are a bunch of military characters, and we're telling comic book stories about them. And they added Captain America to that roster. So they were doing that. They were glorifying our troops, right?
Well, before we move on to question 2, we just have a really fun shout out that we want to do. Allie's dad recently had retired, and we just want to say happy retirement and thanks for listening to all of these shows. So
yeah, very dedicated listener, and actually has made a surprise unplanned cameo on one of the episodes that Allie was on.
Oh, that's right.
So honorary panelist on Vaguely Scientific. Congratulations.
Happy retirement. Congratulations, yeah.
So without further ado, we do have a second question we should probably talk about. And that is, if you could have a dinner party with 3 famous scientists, alive or dead, who would you invite and what dish would you serve?
Oh boy.
I just had a thought that it did not occur to me till right this minute.
Okay.
But technically, I count as a scientist.
Ooh,
so
I invite
you're welcome
Jim.
to have me into dinner.
I absolutely invite Jim.
I
did it. I'm getting free food.
I do not invite Jim, and you will find out
I wouldn't
why.
either.
I want to say right off the bat, because it's less funny if I wait, I don't know a lot of living scientists by name, and I don't really want to have a lot of dead scientists at a dinner party because I don't want to be responsible for carrying all of the conversation. Right? That's okay. I have more, but that's...
No, I get it. I just sort of was operating under the assumption that it was like the Star Trek holodeck episode where it was like Einstein and Stephen Hawking. It's like, oh, they're just like alive for the day or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's why I had to say it first.
Yeah.
So I want to ask us, can we share the dishes we're making before we share the scientists?
Oh.
I didn't really plan the dishes too thoroughly. But I did make an all-vegetarian spread because I found out in the course of my research that one of the scientists I picked was actually vegetarian. But I chose some impossible meat because I think that's just fun. It's an interesting taste. I don't like it all of the time, but it is on occasion a fun treat.
That is so considerate of you, Jim.
I
See,
try.
You should have invited Jim to your dinner party. He's very considerate.
No, I should not have. Here's why.
Oh, okay.
Here is my dish. I am making a casserole of the most rancid, rotting fish I can find, and bits of shards of glass. A glasserole, if you will. And they can have it washed down with warm horse urine for all I care.
Wow.
And so, Jim, you see why I have not invited you to this dinner party.
I appreciate not being invited.
I took this question and saw an opportunity to vent a lot of impotent rage I have at people who are long dead and I will never meet.
Yeah.
I did not do that. But I did something equally not in the spirit of the question. So, well, let me kick this off then, I think. So I stuck actually with the idea that if I'm having a dinner, I didn't go with the Star Trek holodeck. I went with like actually in person with these people, which means that if they were dead, I needed them to be reanimated, or I needed to travel through time.
Mm-hmm.
The names that I picked were Stephen Hawking.
Oh, okay.
Specifically for no other reason. The reason I'm not going to stick on these too much is because I honestly don't feel like I could have a full evening's conversation with most of these people. And but Stephen Hawking famously hosted a dinner party for time travelers from the future.
Oh, right.
So I could be that time traveler from the future, is my thinking.
Yeah.
And that's the extent of the thought I put into Stephen Hawking. And then there are two other names that I found interesting, and the reason that I'm going off the rails and the reason that I constructed the rest of the list, which is far more fun for me, is because I don't actually want to talk to these people. But I found it interesting when I was looking up, because the first person I thought of here, and I know what you're immediately going to say, when I thought about reanimating the dead, I thought, Victor Frankenstein counts as a scientist.
He is
It said alive or dead, right? Said alive or dead didn't necessarily say real. That led me to, I get your objection, Jim, I do.
That was the extent of my objection.
Okay. But that led me to read what research have we actually done in reanimating the dead. And so I got two names here. I got from the 1800s a name of Giovanni Aldini, who famously, in addition to being like the pioneer of galvanization, or galvanism, he also is famous for having experimented on dead animal bodies, sending electricity through their corpses and realizing that the muscles would contract and move, and with electricity he could make the animals appear that they have reanimated. And then this led to people, in addition to Mary Shelley, taking the idea that could we revive a human being with electricity? And they finally realized about in the 1920s, 1930s, they pretty much stopped doing that. They're like, this isn't getting us anywhere. And then a little while later, a man named Robert E. Cornish, who is an American biologist who studied at the University of California, Berkeley, experimented on cadavers of animals, said by rocking them back and forth to move blood around while injecting the animal with a mixture of anticoagulants and steroids, was able to revive some euthanized animals. Now, I did look for this, so if anybody finds this information, I did really look for it. How long the animals had been dead, I cannot find that information. But because of the success of that of that experiment, he tried to move on to human testing. And a death row inmate in California by the name of Thomas McGonigal volunteered his body post-execution to see if they could reanimate it, and the state of California denied this request, and all research since has been discontinued. But I learned that, and would I want to have dinner with these people? Probably not. But that's where my rabbit hole dive went.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
I like the angle you took with that question.
Yeah. I'll give you my actual list of people a little bit later, but I've been talking for a while. So.
I really want to know why you're giving people broken glass. Please, Anne, tell us, what is the scoop?
Let me get into this. I will say I will consider other angles to this question, because like part of me was like, I should just invite 3 random Victorians and feed them mummies, because that's what the Victorian scientists were doing.
They'd like that.
I know. I had that thought of like, it doesn't matter who they are. So that's my honorable mention strategy, because I thought it would be funny. But no. So, all right. My table includes Dr. J. Marion Sims, Dr. John Cutler, and his 2 colleagues, Dr. Austin Diebert and Dr. Murray Smith. Now, I realize that takes me to 4, but John Cutler, these were colleagues in their thing, so I'm going to make them +1s. And also, my bonus 3rd is not one singular scientist, because for some reason, their names are actually very hard to find. So I'm just going to make a general invitation to the Soviet engineers of the Moscow Oblast Dog Training Center.
I feel like I saw that coming.
I don't recall off the top of my head who any of these people are. I can infer from the context that they are not good people, but I don't know about the Moscow dog training facility, but I don't think I'm going to like it.
You're gonna hate it. So here we go. Glass shards at the ready. These are all things I assure you have heard of, but we're going to put names on them, except for the Moscow Training Center, which again, I really genuinely tried to find names, and it was very difficult to find the names of these engineers. Soviet records, not great in terms of the World War II records, but anyway, let's start at the top. J. Marion Sims. J. Marion Sims is actually pretty well known. He had a few statues in the US. He is known as the father of gynecology.
Oh, dear.
Born in 1813, died in 1883. Now, I will give him his due. He did make advancements in reproductive health surgical procedures. As someone who has a uterus, it is potentially useful to me. That being said, this guy... Alright, so he decided he was gonna have to do some experiments on certain surgical procedures due to injuries that had happened to women during childbirth. I won't get into the nitty-gritty, it's a little gross. What he did was he went to local slave owners and went, hey, do you have any enslaved women who have had reproduction damage during childbirth? I won't make you pay for the surgeries, but you do have to pay for their upkeep, and also I can do whatever I want to them. Also, they won't be under anesthesia. Also, we didn't ask. They didn't get to consent. Unfortunately, due to his records, we don't have the names of all of these women. We do have the names of 3, which in recent history have now been known as the mothers of gynecology, because really, they were putting in more work. He did these surgeries to these women, not just like once in the sense of, oh, you have some damage to your reproductive system, I will fix it and send you on your way. No, he repeatedly undid and redid the surgeries on one woman at least 60 times. So.
I feel like that's... I don't know. I don't know anything about surgery, to be fair. But I feel like the more you do the same surgery to the same person, you are not going to learn much, because you are going to cause a lot more damage, and it's going to make it complicated. I don't know.
He seems to feel that it was helping him perfect his technique. He's truly awful. And also, I want to point out, when he took them, in his own, writings, he wrote an autobiography, because of course he did. He claims that he would do nothing to them that would endanger their lives, because he didn't want their owners to feel like he was ruining their property.
Mm,
So he was like, no,
Good.
I'll keep him alive, and then made no other promises, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm also looking at my notes. I misspoke. 30 times on one woman, not 60. I doubled that. That's still awful.
It's not better. Like, it's still too many.
Yeah, it's far too many.
Yeah, it's appalling. Anyway.
I genuinely, I'm sorry to interrupt the list here, but like Jim said, don't know anything about surgery, but like you do procedures repeatedly on different cadavers in medical school, because once you've already done the procedure, you change the anatomy. Like
Yeah.
that's just not okay. Go on. I'm sorry. Logic bothers me.
Yeah, well, so there he is. We have since re-examined his legacy, and people are more aware of the damage he did to get the research he is credited with. So we're at least moving away from that a little bit. I want to give a shout out to the 3 women whose names we know. Their names are Lucy, Betsy, and Anarcha. Anarcha is the one that he performed 30 times on. And so,
wow.
Despite the fact that these women did not consent or sign up for it, they did. He does write that they said they wanted to be cured, but that there is no situation in which someone who is enslaved and doesn't have agency can give fully informed consent. And so, I don't want to swear on here, but yeah, F him. Anyway.
Yeah.
Moving on down the list. Dr. John Cutler and his 2 colleagues, Dr. Diebert and Dr. Smith. Dr. John Cutler was involved in 2 medical studies. We can call them that loosely. The first was in the early turn of the century at Guantanamo Bay. And then he took the results and his experience from performing these on prisoners to the Tuskegee experiments.
Oh, no.
If you are not familiar,
let's give that guy glass.
If you are not familiar with the Tuskegee experiments, this was a long-running research study with the most loosest air quotes I can ever put on that, where they wanted to see the results of syphilis. And I believe specifically they were testing penicillin's efficacy on it. I am not sure. They took a population of African-American sharecroppers, a portion of which had latent syphilis, and they did it under the guise of providing them free medical treatment. And then they proceeded to not treat their syphilis and also not tell them they had it, and also let these individuals marry. And so the women in this community were given syphilis. Children were born with congenital syphilis, which is a thing that can happen. And so generations of people were infected with this horrific degenerative disease. And they weren't told. And they weren't treated. And what makes this, what just really drives this home for me, it eventually was outed because somebody who was like a minor researcher on it went, this doesn't seem ethical, and leaked it to a friend of his who was a journalist. And that is the only way we know this happened, is because the journalist was like, hey, this was going on. It went on for 40 years, I believe, the time frame of this experiment. And over the course of this time, World War II happened. Captain America has put me in a World War II kind of theme. World War II happened, and many of these young men who were part of this experiment enlisted. And during their screening for that, they were told, hey, you have syphilis. And these researchers prevented the military from treating them because they claimed it would ruin their results.
Wow. I don't think I knew that part.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's the Tuskegee experiments. And my special offer is the Moscow Oblast Dog Training Center. In World War II, the Russians were dealing with the issue of German tanks. And they were experimenting with an awful lot of anti-tank warfare.
Oh, no.
And one of their solutions was strapping bombs to dogs. and training them to run under tanks.
Wow.
During which a lever on the pack the dog was wearing would detonate, and theoretically it would damage the enemy tank. And, of course, murder the dog.
Mm.
And this...
Boy.
Not only was this just such a casual... And this is a personal thing, because anyone who knows me knows I love animals, and I love dogs especially, and I hate them being betrayed. But also, I want to point out that this program was not successful in the least, and the amount of animal lives that they wasted. Anyway, it's a little vindicating. So the fun facts about this. Originally, their plan was they were going to train dogs. Fun fact. Originally, and you will see why. They wanted to train dogs to run under the tanks and like pull a little like lever that released the bomb, and then the dogs would run back.
Mm.
But they couldn't successfully get dogs to do that consistently. It's a little too like involved. And so they switched to disposable dogs, and that is the term they use. Unfortunately, and quiet puppy vengeance, they trained these dogs under Russian tanks, which means when they took these dogs in the field, what tanks did they run under?
Oh.
They realized after the fact that the German tanks used different fuel than Russian tanks, and the dogs were following their noses. So they were going to the tanks that smelled familiar. Mm-hmm. Or they were running up to the German tanks, and because they had been trained under tanks that stood still, that weren't mobile, they were running up to the German tanks being like, this one's moving. I'll either wait for it to stop, or, well, I can't do it. And then they'd run back into the trench, and it would detonate on the Russians anyway. So there was a little bit of a reap what you sow there that makes me smile. But like they killed so many animals, because also the Germans figured this out very quickly because they had the bodies of the dogs. So it's also led to a policy where the German military were told, if you see a dog on the battlefield, to shoot immediately. So many of these animals were killed before they got anywhere near the tanks. So many of them were killed for accidental detonation. So many of them were killed futilely because they were killing the Russians, because the Russians did not consider these aspects. And honestly, eventually the trainers were the ones that they refused to take on new animals because they were seeing so many animals die that it was having a toll, naturally. So the trainers themselves were like, we can't. And again, it was proved it was ineffective. It was doing nothing, but it was a lot of animal life. And there's a whole history of animals being used in war in ways that just make me so sad. But like this one in particular, I don't know what about it I just find so upsetting, because the training process was long. Like they had these animals for a while, and then they were just like, okay, and now you blow up. Anyway.
Well, and it's another one of those things, kind of like what we talked about with Captain America. It's like, well, you put all of this time and effort into this one thing, and then it just gets killed at the end. And it's like, well, that was a waste of time and effort then. There are many better ways you could do this.
Well, yeah, and like, again, it's that thing of like, living creatures, whether human or animal, are not the best weapons. They would have been better pressed putting those bombs in slingshots and just kind of lobbing them at the
yeah.
Anyway, so this is my awful dinner party, and Jim, this is why I didn't invite you.
I think the Glasserole is too good for a lot of these people.
Here's the thing, I also thought about putting arsenic in there, and I was like, no, too quick.
Yeah, good point.
When did we coin the term Glasserole? I missed that, and I love it.
At some point I said it, and I just kept, I held on to it.
I liked it.
I missed it before. Okay, I like it.
Anyway, Jim, bring up the tone.
Jim, do your thing.
Tell us about your nice, pleasant vegetarian.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd played this real straight. So I found out, and these are scientists that everyone's heard of, and they're people who are fairly respected and beloved, at least in some capacity. So we'll start with Nikola Tesla.
Sure.
I think it'd be really fun to hear him talk about some of the things that turned out to be pretty wild in the end, like his death ray or wireless. Like I think that kind of stuff is really interesting, and I would love to hear him just talk about those. He was the one who's the vegetarian, though, and I didn't know that until I was doing research for this. And then as I was going through, I was like, oh, I wonder if the other ones are too. But I think he was the only one. But yeah, just sort of the really high concept stuff that he's known for. I think it'd be fun to hear about that sort of thing.
Wasn't he known for being like notoriously really shy though? I feel like you'd have to carry the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that, and I was reading through some of his habits, and it seems as though it is that he was very shy, but like once you got him going, he would sort of like keep on going, which is kind of what I was banking on. So.
Okay.
Delightful.
Yeah. So the other person that I had here on my list, number 2, is Carl Sagan, which again, very well known, very respected figure, but really knowledgeable about space. And I could listen to someone talk about space for upwards of 17 hours. So I was like, this guy's a science communicator as well as a scientist. So I'm sure he would have some really interesting stuff to say about the planets. And also, I took this as a way of taking them out of their time and sort of showing them where they are, or like where we are now as a society. So like all of the cool space things that we've had since Carl Sagan died. We have the James Webb Telescope. We've got pictures of Pluto now. So that would be kind of a fun thing to show off. Then my last one, and in much the same vein, is a scientist named Rosalind Franklin, who is fairly well known, but probably of the 3 on my list, maybe not as well known. But her research was really, really critical in discovering the structure of DNA. And she is not only sort of brushed aside in a lot of these conversations about, who discovered the structure of DNA, but she also had a lot of her research just outright stolen from her. And so, and then the other thing is that she died before the Nobel Prize for DNA's structural discovery was actually awarded. And as I understand, they don't give Nobel Prizes posthumously, so she wasn't even like nominated for that either. So I kind of want to bring her into the future and be like, look, people know you now, and you did a great job.
Who stole her research? I'll pull up 2 more chairs.
Well, so it was Watson and Crick and a couple of their allies, and I feel like they weren't as bad as the people you talked about. Like
I was gonna say there's a different level.
It was a jerk move, but they have been sort of correctly noticed by history as like, hey, you shouldn't have done that. And like Rosalind Franklin is now a much more well-known figure. And I think one of them in the end sort of was like, hey, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. like towards the end of their life or whatever. But so yeah, I think it'd be not only just to have dinner with these people and like hear their fascinating research, but also just to give them a view of what they have missed out on since their deaths.
That's fair. I like all of those answers. Here's my actual answers. The reason that I struggled with this question, and the reason that I wanted to point out that Jim's answer makes a lot of sense and why I don't think I would enjoy a dinner with those individuals is because I genuinely feel like I would have trouble having a conversation with, I could joke with them like I do on this podcast, I'm sure, because they were human beings and probably capable of talking about stuff other than their field,
capable of humor, I would imagine.
Right. But that's kind of where I was like, do I care that much about space? Not really. Do I care that much about electricity? Not enough to have a whole dinner party. So I was like, who would I invite? So 2 names came to mind. One was Harry Houdini, who I would count as a scientist because he invented and improved upon many mechanical stage illusions. And another is James Randi, in a similar vein, more modern, but also a stage magician who became a very well-known debunker of the paranormal. And I find that topic fascinating. And but also a magician, you see. So there's a theme there. And my third pick I really struggled with because I was like, I don't need a third magician. I don't. I feel like I got two. And then I was like, but what are things that I'd be interested in talking about? And this one might be a stretch, but I included Jules Verne, who is not strictly a scientist, but a science fiction author who very notably wrote about technology that eventually was developed later. And I think the fact that he was a fiction author, I could probably have an interesting conversation about like the fictional applications of sci-fi.
That would be interesting, yeah.
So those who are the final answers I settled on for the purpose of recording this podcast. What I think I would like the listeners to let us know this week is if you could have dinner with three famous Avengers.
Oh.
Who would you pick? And I regret asking that immediately because
now you want to answer it.
In the meantime, if you have thoughts on that and would like to send us your list of Avengers or scientists or books we should read or dogs we should look at pictures of that you send, that flowed weird. But anyway, you can email those to feedback@vaguelyscientific.com, or you can comment on our blog, or you can like us on Facebook, or you can find us on Blue Sky @vaguelyscientific. Hey, Jim, where do we get all these wacky questions?
We get them from you, the listeners. And if you have a question that needs to be answered in a vaguely scientific manner, please email us at questions@vaguelyscientific.com. If you want to get our episodes the minute that they're released, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and all the other great places that podcasts like to hang out. And subscribing and leaving feedback really helps us out, and so does telling your friends.
Yeah, especially if they are scientists, living or dead.
Yeah. Our vaguely musical intro is composed by Anthony Pizzelli, and don't forget to check out our merch store over at vaguelyscientific.threadless.com. Unlike some of the scientists we talked about today, there are ethics probably, and you can get that design on a t-shirt or a mug or anything that you might want to have.
I've been trying to think of the best place to put that in there that didn't make it in bad taste.
Right, yeah.
All episode.
New t-shirt for Jim can be like, give me all your vials.
Put it on the list.
I do like having vials. They're very useful for things.
Well, you can have all of... Well, no, I want my vial. Anyway.
Actually, so my favorite scientific equipment is probably the Erlenmeyer flask.
Yes.
So I'll take all those.
It's a good flask.
Yeah.
Oh, can I submit a question right now?
Flask.
What's your favorite
Sure.
piece of scientific equipment and why?
Ooh, and why?
Now equipment or like glassware, because those
Like,
are...
don't answer this now, Jim. I'm just adding it to the list.
Okay.
We can explore everything.
That's, you know what? I like it.
So thank you to Anne, not only for that question, but also for being our guest this week.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome. I'm sorry for making everyone sad.
Sad or outraged? Those are different.
I hope it's outrage, because at least that is productive.
Yeah, okay. Well, for Vaguely Scientific, I am Derek.
I'm Jim.
I'm Anne.
And maybe the show is over, maybe it isn't. Either way, this seems like a good place to stop. At least for now.
Toodaloo, everyone.
And then we're going to talk about if you could have a dinner party with three famous scientists, alive or dead, who would you invite and what dish would you serve? Oh, no!
Did you forget to make a dish?
I didn't put any thought into the dish.
Mashed potatoes.
Okay, no,
it's got to be mashed potatoes then.
I have it already. I was already going off the rails with this question, so it'll be fine.
Oh, I want to see if you went more off the rails than I did.
Wow. For once, I might be the one who stayed on the rails.
Someone had to.
Someone had to.
No, they didn't.
Oh, okay.
We are under no moral obligation to stay on the rails.
We can do whatever we want. There are no rails.